I learned very early in my SEAL career that your mind will try to destroy you long before the world ever gets the chance. And the moment that lesson hit me wasn't in combat. It wasn't during a mission. It was during Hell Week in the middle of the night with freezing water up to my neck and a boat full of exhausted candidates collapsing around me. The instructors had us in the Pacific, waves slamming into our faces, bodies shaking uncontrollably, and that's when it happened. My own mind turned against me. The water wasn't what broke me. The cold wasn't what broke me. The pain wasn't what broke me. It was the voice in my head telling me I couldn't take another second. That voice shows up with no warning. You think you're mentally tough until your brain whispers just loud enough for you to hear, "You're done. You're finished. Quit before you drown." And the dangerous part? It sounds rational, logical, like it's trying to protect you. But it's a liar. Your mind lies to you first, before fear, before pain, before danger. And that lie is strong enough to make most people break before they ever take their next step. According to Navy psychological evaluators, the majority of SEAL candidates don't quit because their bodies fail. They quit because their mind convinces them the suffering will never end. That illusion becomes so overwhelming that they stop fighting long before their real limit is reached. And in that moment, standing there in the ocean with the moon barely visible above us, I realized I was hearing the same lie everyone else hears. I felt it pulling me under, convincing me that quitting was the reasonable choice. My legs were numb, my jaw was locked, my breath was shallow, my body didn't feel like mine anymore, and still the most dangerous battle was happening inside my head, not around me. The instructors didn't need to break us. Our own thoughts were doing the job for them. That was the first moment I truly understood what I'm about to tell you. If you don't control your mind, it will control you. I remember staring at one of the guys to my left, his teeth chattering so hard I thought they'd break. He looked at me with this empty, defeated expression, and I knew exactly what he was feeling. He had already lost the fight inside. His body was still in the water, but mentally, he was on the truck back to base, already planning what he'd tell his family when he returned home. He would quit not because he was weak, but because he gave his mind permission to take over. But something shifted inside me. A kind of quiet clarity cut through the panic. I told myself, if I can survive this second, I can survive the next one. I stopped letting my mind project into the future. I stopped letting it tell stories about how long this would last. I stopped negotiating. And the moment I did that, the suffering didn't disappear, but I did take back control. That's the part most people don't understand. You don't win the battle by becoming fearless. You win by refusing to let fear make decisions for you. The mind feeds on imagination, so you starve it by staying in the present moment. One breath, 1 second, one choice. In that freezing ocean, I learned something that still guides me today. Most people lose the war long before the first shot is fired. They lose it at the first sign of discomfort, the first whisper of doubt, the first rise of panic, not because they're incapable, but because they never learned to recognize that the enemy isn't outside. It's the voice inside saying, quit while you still can. That night, I didn't become a SEAL because I was stronger than the other men. I became a SEAL because I learned to dominate the only battlefield that truly matters, my mind. And from that moment on, everything in my life changed. The title of this lesson isn't a slogan. It's the simplest, hardest truth of human performance. Control your mind before it controls you. Most people don't realize how quickly their mind can betray them. Not with dramatic danger, not with explosions or gunfire, but with something far quieter and far more common. Panic doesn't begin when something terrible happens. Panic begins the moment your brain senses a threat, even if that threat isn't real. And once that primitive system kicks in, it hijacks your decisions before you ever get a vote. I learned this in the teams, but I see it everywhere now, in meeting rooms, in traffic, in someone opening an email that makes their chest tighten. You don't need a battlefield for panic to take over. You just need uncertainty. You just need pressure. You just need your brain misreading the moment. A Harvard stress response study shows that the brain reacts to perceived threats the exact same way it reacts to real ones. Your body doesn't care whether you're being chased by an enemy or you're reading a message from your boss that says, we need to talk. To the primitive part of your mind, both situations feel like danger. So your nervous system does what it was designed to do. It floods you with chemicals, narrows your focus, and pushes you into survival mode. Fight, flee, or freeze. The problem is simple. Your modern life is triggering an ancient system, and that ancient system is terrible at telling the difference between a life or death moment and a minor inconvenience. I've seen guys freeze on the battlefield because their brain locked onto a single sound. I've seen executives freeze in a conference room because someone challenged their idea. Different environments, same reaction. When your threat response activates, logic shuts down, vision narrows, you stop seeing options, you stop thinking clearly, and without even noticing when it happened, you're no longer in control. Your mind is. The biggest mistake people make is believing they need more motivation to get through that moment. They think, if I just get fired up enough, I can push through. But motivation is useless when the primitive brain has already pulled the fire alarm. You can't inspire your way out of a hijacked nervous system. You have to interrupt it. You have to override it. You have to break the pattern before it spirals. In Bud/S, I watched candidates who were physically strong, mentally sharp, and highly motivated crumble the moment panic grabbed them. It wasn't their character that failed, it was their chemistry. Their body was running a program older than civilization itself. If you don't know how to interrupt that program, it runs until you quit. I had to learn this the hard way. During one evolution, I found myself losing control. My breathing went shallow, my hands were shaking, my mind was racing in every direction. That's when one of the instructors got close enough for me to hear him over the chaos. He didn't scream, he didn't threaten. He said something I'll never forget: control your breathing and you'll control your mind. It sounded too simple, but it worked, and I've used it ever since. Here's the truth. Panic is a physiological loop, not a psychological weakness. Break the loop and you break the panic. That's why I teach my 10-second SEAL breathing reset. It's not mindfulness, it's not meditation. It's a tactical override for your nervous system. You breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 2, breathe out for 4. Repeat it twice. It forces your heart rate down. It widens your perception. It returns blood flow to the rational part of your brain. In 10 seconds, your system goes from chaos to clarity. I've used that reset in firefights, in freezing water, and in moments where everything depended on staying calm. But I also use it in everyday life, before difficult conversations, before overwhelming tasks, when my mind starts sprinting ahead of me. And every time it does the same thing, it gives me back control. Most people think panic is a sign of weakness. It isn't. Panic is automatic. What matters is whether you let it run the show. Once you understand that your brain isn't always telling you the truth, and once you know how to interrupt that primitive system, you stop being its victim. You start leading it. And that's when you finally realize the truth most people never learn. The mind's panic mode isn't the enemy. Not knowing how to shut it off is. Most people fail at discipline because they think it's an emotional experience. They wait to feel ready, feel inspired, feel motivated. But discipline built on emotion is guaranteed to collapse because emotions are unstable. They rise, fall, change direction, and disappear without warning. That's why so many people stick to a routine for a week, maybe 2, and then lose all momentum the moment life punches them in the mouth. They think they failed because they're weak. But the truth is simpler. Their system was flawed from the start. They built their discipline on how they felt instead of who they were. Researchers at Stanford found that the key to long-term behavior change is identity, not motivation. Motivation burns hot and dies fast. Identity stays. When I was in the SEAL teams, I didn't push through Hell Week because I felt motivated. I pushed because quitting didn't match the identity I had already agreed to become. That's the part people misunderstand. Discipline isn't about force. It's about alignment. When your identity is clear, your decisions become automatic. When it isn't, every action becomes a negotiation, and most people negotiate themselves straight into failure. The internal quitting voice shows up in those negotiations. That voice is sneaky. It doesn't scream at you. It whispers. It sounds reasonable, even compassionate. You worked hard today. Take tomorrow off. You can start again next week. You're tired. You deserve a break. That voice always speaks in excuses disguised as kindness. And if you're not aware of it, it rewrites your standards without your permission. People think the quitting voice appears during big challenges, but in my experience, it shows up during small moments, the exact moments that determine who you become. During training, I learned that discipline isn't about being strong every day. It's about shutting down the negotiation. That's where my first agreement rule came from. It's simple, and it changed everything for me. The first agreement you make with yourself each day must be honored no matter what. That first agreement is small on purpose. Not a marathon, not an entire routine, one action you can't talk your way out of, one behavior that sets your identity for the rest of the day. When you keep the first agreement, your brain receives a message: I follow through. The rest of the actions become easier because the tone has already been set. Most people rely on momentum. They think if they have a good streak going, they'll stay committed. But momentum is fragile. One bad day, one setback, one stressful moment, momentum dies instantly. And when it dies, people think they have to rebuild the entire mountain. That belief is what makes them quit. What they should be doing is returning to the smallest possible commitment. Discipline isn't about perfection. It's about the micro commitments you honor even on your worst days. In my life, I've used a simple loop to rewire my behavior. Make a micro agreement, keep it, reinforce the identity it supports. The action feeds the identity feeds the next action. It becomes a closed cycle. That's how SEALS move without hesitation. Not because we're superhuman, but because we've stopped debating with ourselves. We execute small agreements that build an unbreakable internal standard. Once you understand that discipline isn't about emotion, momentum, or dramatic effort, everything becomes simpler. Discipline becomes the natural expression of identity. You don't wake up wondering whether you feel like doing something. You do it because it aligns with who you are. And when you live that way, the quitting voice gets quieter each day until eventually it stops being part of the conversation altogether. Negative thoughts don't show up one at a time. They arrive in clusters. One becomes five, and five becomes a spiral that pulls you down faster than you can react. That's the danger people don't see coming. Negative thoughts multiply faster than you can fight them. You don't lose because one bad thought hits you. You lose because your mind starts looping, replaying the same fear in different forms until it feels inescapable. I've watched strong, capable men get trapped in that cycle during training, not because the situation was impossible, but because their mind convinced them it was. Japanese military psychologists discovered that once the brain enters a catastrophic loop, logic goes offline. The mind stops problem solving and starts forecasting disaster. Every thought becomes an extension of the last one. What if I fail? Becomes, what if this ruins everything? Which becomes, everyone will see me fail and I won't recover. It's not the thoughts themselves that crush you, it's the acceleration. That continuous tightening loop creates a sense of collapse. And once that loop starts, trying to think positive is like telling a storm to calm down. The mind doesn't listen, it doubles down. I learned early in the SEAL teams that you can't outthink a negative spiral with more thinking. You have to interrupt it. You have to sever the loop before it gains speed. Most people try to fight their thoughts with nicer thoughts, hoping that positivity will override panic or doubt, but the brain ignores forced positivity when it's already in threat mode. It treats those positive thoughts as noise. Meanwhile, the negative ones feel more urgent, more real, more convincing. That's why someone who seems rational one moment can become overwhelmed the next. They're not weak, they're stuck in a neurological feedback loop. In combat, these spirals can be deadly. One intrusive thought can make a man hesitate. Hesitation can get someone killed. During one mission, I felt myself slipping into that cycle. We were facing uncertainty, darkness, and the unknown, and I started imagining every possible outcome. My breathing changed, my focus narrowed. I felt myself drifting into the mental danger zone where the story in my head becomes louder than the reality around me. That's when I use the technique that has saved me more times than I can count. It's not motivational, it's not emotional. It's a pattern breaking phrase designed specifically to reset the brain. I say one sentence out loud or in my mind: stop, control now. Those three words are a command, not a suggestion. They interrupt the loop by shifting me from thinking to action. They signal my brain to stop forecasting and return to ownership. Ownership of breath, body, and attention. It sounds almost too simple, but that's exactly why it works. When you're spiraling, complexity is your enemy. You need a fast, decisive break in the pattern. Stop, control now. Snaps the brain out of imagination and forces it back into the present moment. It creates just enough space for you to choose your next move instead of being dragged by your thoughts. Once the interruption happens, action must follow immediately, not more thoughts. Action. Controlled action shuts down catastrophic thinking because the brain can't be fully engaged in movement and anxiety simultaneously. That's the secret most people never learn. You replace thinking with action. After the phrase, I shift my breathing, adjust my posture, or give myself a single physical task. Any action works as long as it's immediate and intentional. That action becomes the anchor that pulls you out of the mental riptide. I still use this method every day. When my mind starts pushing worst case scenarios, when fear tries to exaggerate reality, when doubt tries to roll downhill faster than I can keep up, I don't argue with it. I don't think positive. I interrupt it, I command it, and then I move. That combination, interruption plus action, is how SEALS crush negative spirals before they take control. Your mind will always try to forecast danger because that's its job. But when you know how to break the loop, those thoughts lose their power. You stop drowning in possibilities and return to the only place you can actually win, right here in the present where you still have control. Comfort is the most dangerous enemy you'll ever face because it doesn't look like one. Stress announces itself, chaos demands attention, pressure forces you to rise or collapse. But comfort slips in quietly. It rewards you in the moment while weakening you over time. According to Finnish resilience researchers, prolonged comfort lowers your threshold for stress, making even small challenges feel overwhelming. It dulls your instincts, slows your reactions, and softens your mind without you noticing. People think they're avoiding pain by choosing comfort, but what they're really doing is surrendering their resilience piece by piece. I've watched this happen in the teams. Men who could handle cold, exhaustion, and uncertainty for days started to fall apart when life became easy. Without challenge, their mental edge faded. They weren't worse people. They were simply untrained. The mind is like muscle. If you don't put it under tension, it decays. That's why comfort weakens you faster than stress does. Stress forces adaptation. Comfort erases it. But here's the part that gives people hope. You don't need extreme challenges to rebuild mental strength. You don't need to run ultra marathons or take ice baths every morning or throw yourself into misery. In fact, that's the mistake most people make. They go from years of comfort straight into extreme discomfort, thinking that intensity equals growth. It doesn't. Intensity without consistency leads to burnout. People try to transform their life in one giant leap, and when they inevitably fail, they blame themselves instead of blaming their strategy. Real resilience comes from controlled discomfort, small, manageable moments that teach your mind it can handle more than it thinks. When I left the teams, I realized something important. The habits that made me strong weren't the dramatic ones. They were the daily ones, the small frictions I chose on purpose. That's how my low stress exposure protocol was born. It's built on one idea: challenge yourself in ways that are uncomfortable, but not overwhelming. You apply just enough pressure to wake your mind up without sending it into panic. When you practice low stress exposure, you teach your brain a new message. Discomfort isn't danger. That message rewires your thresholds. You become someone who can handle uncertainty, pressure, and setbacks without shutting down. Your identity becomes resilient because it's reinforced in tiny increments day after day. You can build this into your everyday life without adding hours of routines. Turn normal tasks into resilience training. Take cold water at the end of your shower, not to prove anything, but to practice staying calm. Park farther away and walk in cold weather, not because you need the steps, but because it's slightly inconvenient. Say no to the elevator when you're tired. Delay the first sip of coffee by 10 minutes. Wake up when the alarm rings instead of negotiating for 5 more minutes of sleep. These aren't punishments, they're signals. Every small act of chosen discomfort strengthens the part of your mind that refuses to fold. What makes low stress exposure so powerful is its compounding effect. A single rep doesn't change you, but 100 micro reps of discomfort create a mind that no longer fears challenge. You stop expecting life to be easy, you stop avoiding effort, and you stop interpreting stress as a threat. Instead, you see it as something you've already proven you can survive. This is the shift that changes everything. When you train your mind this way, everyday obstacles stop rattling you. Stress no longer feels like pressure. It feels like familiar ground. Chaos becomes something you can navigate, and comfort loses the power it once had over you. I've lived on both sides of this. I've experienced extreme hardship, and I've experienced the dangerous pull of a comfortable life. One sharpens you, the other erodes you. Choosing discomfort on purpose is the antidote. It keeps you awake. It keeps you capable. It keeps you becoming someone who cannot be broken by the first sign of difficulty. Your mind grows stronger every time you willingly face what's slightly uncomfortable. And over time, those small choices add up to the kind of resilience that can handle anything life throws at you. Before I ever stepped into my first real mission, one of the senior guys told me something I didn't understand at the time. If you don't train your mind, life will train it for you, and life doesn't care how prepared you are. I learned the truth of that sentence the hard way, watching situations unfold where hesitation, fear, or scattered thoughts could have cost lives. But you don't need to be in combat to feel the consequences. In everyday life, an untrained mind makes you overreact, procrastinate, avoid, sabotage, and collapse under pressure you should be strong enough to handle. A mind without direction becomes a weapon pointed at its owner. The good news is that mental control isn't something you're born with, it's something you build. And it's far simpler than most people think. Neuroscientists from Oxford explain that the brain adapts fastest when it receives consistent cues, not massive changes, not overwhelming routines, but small, repeated instructions that tell it who you intend to become. That means your mind is trainable at any age, any stage, any circumstance, but only if you stop trying to overhaul your whole life in one day. That's the biggest mistake I see people make. They wake up one morning and decide they're going to transform themselves. New habits, new routines, new diet, new mindset, all at once. It feels powerful for a few hours, maybe a few days, until the pressure crushes them and they snap back into their old patterns. They think they failed. They think they're too weak. What they don't realize is that they tried to fight a lifetime of conditioning with brute force instead of strategy. A dominant mind isn't built through intensity, it's built through anchors. My entire system comes down to three parts, but the most important part is the first one, the one most people ignore because it seems too simple. I call it the non negotiable anchor. This is a single action you commit to every morning, no matter what. It's the first command you give your mind. And when you honor that command, it rewires your identity for the rest of the day. The anchor has to be small, not impressive, not dramatic, small enough that you can't argue your way out of it. It might be making your bed with precision, drinking a full glass of water before anything else, stretching for 1 minute, standing in silence for 45 seconds. Whatever it is, it's the first internal contract of your day, and your job is to fulfill it without negotiation. When you complete your anchor, the message your brain receives is simple: I follow through. That message becomes the foundation for the second part of the system, micro decisions. Throughout the day, you make dozens of small choices. Take the stairs or the elevator, speak up or stay quiet, start now or delay. A trained mind uses the momentum from the morning anchor to choose the option that strengthens identity instead of weakening it. You're not forcing yourself through willpower. You're acting in alignment with the identity you've already confirmed. The third component is reflection, but not in the fluffy, emotional way people imagine. It's tactical. At the end of the day, you ask one question: did my actions match the mind I'm trying to build? No shame, no drama, just awareness. When you repeat this loop, anchor, aligned micro decisions, reflection, you build an identity that doesn't crumble under fear, hesitation, or temptation. You become someone who acts with clarity because you've trained clarity into your system. This is exactly how SEAL principles operate. You don't wait for motivation. You don't wait for confidence. You don't wait for the right conditions. You train your mind through small, deliberate, non negotiable actions. Day after day, those actions harden you, they sharpen you, they make discipline effortless, not because your life gets easier, but because you become stronger than your circumstances. And here's the real truth: once your identity shifts, everything else becomes automatic. Fear loses its edge, doubt loses its grip, hesitation becomes unfamiliar. You stop sabotaging your progress because sabotage no longer fits the person you believe yourself to be. You don't just control your mind, you dominate it. This framework is what allowed me to handle pressure, chaos, and uncertainty, not just in the teams, but throughout my entire life after. And if you apply it, even in the smallest way, you'll feel the shift sooner than you expect. But this is only the foundation. There's a deeper layer to mental performance, one that most people never reach because they've never been pushed far enough to discover it. That layer is what we call the 40% rule, the principle that when your mind tells you you're done, you're really only just beginning. And in the next video, I'm going to show you exactly how to tap into the remaining 60% you never knew you had.